Last Sunday, we studied Nehemiah chapter 9. As Jonathan mentioned early, Nehemiah chapter 9 is just a time of confession as the nation of Israel is just confessing the sins of their fathers, confessing the sins of themselves, and just kind of this time of confession. So I thought that we would begin our worship time together this morning and our sermon time as just a time of confession. So I'm going to ask you a question, and just kind of use this as a time to confess. How many in this room made and kept your New Year's resolution? Okay, good. New Year's resolution. Nobody kept it from the beginning of the year? Okay, all right. Some of y'all are grabbing your stuff already like we're about to get, no, that's it. All right, we're good. There was a recent study by the University of Scranton, home of Dunder Mifflin, that says that 8% of people who made a New Year's resolution actually keep their New Year's resolution. You have a few weeks to begin to think now about what your New Year's resolution will be next year. But you make this commitment that I'm going to do this for the entire year, and then life happens, and then things begin to transpire, and it's kind of hard to keep that. But we make commitments all the time, right? We make commitments in our marriage. We make commitment with our kids. We make commitment in our work. We made covenants in various aspects of our lives. Nehemiah chapter 10 is the nation of Israel making a covenant with God. They're making a covenant with Him in light of chapter 8 and chapter 9. So I just want to walk through this together and just kind of see how this unfolds in Nehemiah chapter 10 as this group of people here make this commitment to the Lord. So Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 38 is really where we're going to pick up today and then run right into chapter 10. So in Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 38, you have the making of the covenant. So here we go, verse 38. In view of all of this, we're making a binding agreement in writing on a sealed document containing the names of our leaders, Levites, and priests. So circle the word this. In view of all of what? Well, you remember from our study in chapter 8, there's this standing in the public reading of the Word of God, and there's weeping, and there's brokenness, and there's listening to the Bible as the Bible is proclaimed, and people are responding in the midst of this. They're being obedient to the festival of booths and the activities in chapter 8. Then in chapter 9, the nation of Israel regathers, and there's this solemn assembly. There's fasting, and there's weeping, and there's praying, and there's confessing, and there's all of the activities that you see in Nehemiah chapter 9. Then you get to Nehemiah chapter 10, and the nation of Israel is making a commitment to God. So in light of chapter 8, in light of chapter 9, the nation of Israel says, we're going to make a binding agreement. We're going to make a covenant. And the word covenant is found all throughout the Old Testament. It means to cut, and so there's this agreement between God and the nation of Israel that they're going to make to God here. Notice the people who sign it. It says, this is our leaders, our Levites, and our priests. And so then you get to chapter 10, and you have the people signing the document. So just notice the group of people. I'm not going to read the names of all of these people for time and mockery's sake. And so in verses 1 through 8, you have the list of all of the priests, right? And at the end of verse 8, he says, these were the priests. And you have all the names that are listed in verses 1 through 8. In fact, it was somewhere around 84 names are mentioned between verses 1 and verse 27. So you have this leader of the priests, the spiritual leaders here in the nation of Israel. Then, in verses 9 through 13, you have the list of the Levites. He says in verse 9, the Levites were, and then he lists off 17 Levites. And those are continuing on in the spiritual leadership of the nation of Israel. Then, in verses 14 through 27, you have the list of the heads of the people. And there's 44 names listed between verses 14 and 27. These are the leaders of the home. These would be the men of the house. These would be the leaders of the household of the different various groups of people that are represented. And so everybody gathers together, the priests, the Levites, the heads of the household, and they're making this covenant and commitment to God. In fact, jump in with me in verse 28 and notice what the Bible says. The rest of the people, just underline the people who are involved here, the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the temple servants, along with wives, sons, daughters, everyone who is able to understand and who has separated themselves from the surrounding peoples to obey the law of God. This is a comprehensive list of people, right? There's everybody from the spiritual leaders to the lay leaders, the priests, those who are in leading the nation of Israel, that everybody comes to the table. And it's not just the leaders, it's their families, right? I mean, you have wives, you have sons, you have daughters, all the way down to everyone who's able to understand and who separated themselves from the surrounding people. You have people who are in leadership, priests, Levites, you have leaders within the nation, gatekeepers, you have singers, you have temple servants. I mean, everybody's making and signing this covenant. And I think this is something important for us to remember. In chapter 8, there was an exhaustive list of people involved. In chapter 9, this exhaustive list of people involved. And then chapter 10, you have all of these people who are there gathered together who are making this covenant to God. But you have this, what is the covenant they're making? Go to verse 29. Join with their nobles and brothers and committed themselves with a sworn oath, literally enter into in a curse and in an oath, to follow the law of God given through God's servant Moses, and to obey carefully all the commands, ordinances, and statutes of the Lord our God. So, they all gather together, and they make this covenant. But I want you to understand what they're committing to. Here's the covenant they're making this day. Gary, they're literally saying, God, here is my life. Here is who I am. Here's my future. Here's my talents. Here's my abilities. Here's my struggles. Here's my everything that I have. And I'm going to lay it down in this commitment to the Lord on this day that I'm going to follow the law of God and I'm going to obey carefully all the commands of God, the ordinances, the statutes, and the Lord has placed before us. So don't miss this, church. Leaders to little kids, men, women, who are gathered together and they're saying this in this moment: God, here is all of me. Here's my heart. Here's my future. Here's my career. Here's my children. Here's my bank. Here's my finances. Here's everything. God, they're just laying it down, and they're saying to the people here in front of everybody, God, you have complete control of my entire life. And they lay it before me. But I want us to walk through this commitment, and I want you to notice what they're actually committing to. So the first thing that they commit to has to do with marriage. So let's see what the text says. Verse 30. We will not give our daughters in marriage to the surrounding peoples, and will not take their daughters as wives for our sons. And so they say, look, the first commitment we're going to make is the commitment in dealing with marriage. Now this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 7. Stay with me. When the Lord our God brings you into the land you're entering to possess, and he drives out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and the old preacher said the termites, 7 nations more numerous and powerful than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you and you defeat them, you must completely destroy them. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Verse 3. You must not intermarry with them. You must not give your daughters to their sons and take their daughters for your sons. Verse 4. Because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you and he will swiftly destroy you. So listen. When you get to the nation of Israel and you have all of these other nations out there, do not intermarry with them. Do not marry them. Do not build families with them. Do not build lives with them, because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. And so, if I may, can I just say 3 things about marriage in relation to this? First, if you're single, if you're a student, if you're a young adult, if you're in high school or college and you're trying to figure out who to marry, may I say 3 things? First, do not missionary date. You say, what in the world are you talking about? You find some guy that you really love. He's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You think he's awesome. You think she's amazing. You think she's incredible, but she's lost, and she doesn't know Jesus, or he doesn't know Jesus. May I say to you, as just your friend, do not date or marry a lost person. You say, well, that's just old school. You're crazy. You're just an old guy. Maybe I am. But I can tell you how many countless of people that I have known through the years who have entered into a relationship, dating or marriage, where somebody doesn't know Jesus. And what happens is most often, not always, but what happens most often is exactly what this verse said. Go back to verse 4. They turn their sons away to worship other gods. And so you enter into a dating relationship, you enter into a marriage relationship. They don't love Jesus, they don't know Jesus, they don't honor Jesus, they don't worship Jesus, they haven't given their life to Jesus. And all of a sudden, there's this bending towards things that don't honor and glorify the Lord. And the center of your relationship, the basis of your relationship, the foundation of your relationship will become something other than God. And so, maybe I'm old, that's fine. Maybe you sound like my dad, that's fine. But I just want to encourage you. When you begin to pray and ask, God, who am I going to marry? Who am I going to have a relationship with? Who am I going to date? I've told my daughters that they can't date until they're 32. And so, because there's just weird guys out there. But whoever you enter, make this your number one prayer. God, would you please lead me to somebody who has put you first in their life? Would you please lead me to somebody who's put you first in their life? Let's say second. Find somebody who has given their life to honor the Lord in ministry and service and kingdom work. I'm not talking about go marry preacher. I'm not talking about go music guy. But it's one thing to find somebody who's given their life to the Lord, but find somebody in your life. Find somebody who is active in church. Find somebody who's given their life to the Lord, who's committed to God in prayer, in quiet time, in scripture reading, who's serving in various parts of the church, who's working in greeters or nurturers, singing in choir. They're doing like find somebody in your life who's like given themselves over to the Lord. Because here's what I've learned. And I've seen this play out in so many times. The degree that someone is involved in the ministries of the church before they get married is the degree and the level to which they're involved in ministry and church after they get married. I've seen this. All of a sudden, I tell people this when we do marriage counseling. Do not think that when you get married, that all of a sudden you're going to be at church on Sunday school and Sunday morning and various places and ministering and this, that, and the other. I would just say as a word of caution to you, to the degree that somebody is involved in ministry and service in a church before they get married is exactly what it is after they get married. And then I would say this, 3, and this is just, forgive me, I'm not trying to. When you get married, get involved in church. Serve, minister. Find a ministry. Find some capacity in which you can serve together and work together and minister together within the fellowship, where you just commit your marriage to God, or you commit your marriage to the Lord and say, well, we'll get involved in ministry once we have kids, or we'll get involved in church once. No, you won't. When you have kids, your life goes crazy. Trust me, I know. So find somebody new married. I'm just saying, this is the first time I've done this in the 5 years I've been here, so just forgive me, but I'm just telling you, I've seen this happen in so many lives. Find somebody who loves Jesus. Find somebody who's committed their lives to serving Jesus, and when you get married, give your marriage to the Lord in serving God. And so he makes this commitment. He says, here's my life. Here I am. And so the first thing they do in verse 30 of Nehemiah chapter 10 is they say, we're going to make sure our sons and our daughters, Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 30, we're going to make sure that our sons and our daughters are committed in marriage. Number 2, and I press on, he talks about the Sabbath. Here's what happens. In verse 31, he says this. Verse 31, when the surrounding peoples bring merchandise of any kind of grain to sell on the Sabbath, we'll not buy from them on the Sabbath or a holy day. We will leave the land uncultivated in the 7th year and will cancel every single debt. And this comes from Leviticus chapter 25, verse 18. Stay with me. You are to keep my statutes and ordinances and carefully observe them so that you may live securely in the land. Verse 19. Then the land will yield its fruit so that you can eat, be satisfied, and live securely in the land. Verse 20. If you wonder, what will we eat? What will we eat in the 7th year if we don't sow or gather or produce? Verse 21. I will appoint my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that, listen to this, so that it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating from the previous harvest. You will be eating this until the 9th year when its harvest comes in. So he tells them on the 7th year, take the year off. Don't work in the crops. You're like, man, this is incredible. How in the world am I going to provide for my family? How in the world am I going to be able to meet the needs within my own family? God says, look, your 6-year harvest will take care of your 6th year, 7th year, and 8th year. So he talks about this Sabbath and rest. And what in the world? He talks about canceling debts. He talks about not doing business on the Sabbath. We've talked about the Sabbath extensively. I'll say this. Sabbath in just kind of scriptures is this. Sabbath is saying to God, I can do more when time off and you in charge than I can with me plowing through and never resting and let you be leadership over this area. I talk to people and they're like, man, I'm so busy. I got this and I got that and I got this. And I just want to say, like, just find a time to just chill. And just say, God, I'm gonna Sabbath in this early morning hour. I'm going to rest on this day of the week. This is why our church has intentionally taken July to just rest, because I believe that our church can do more and go more and be more doing in 11 months than we could in 12 months and ever pursuing push forward. And so there's this intentional time of rest. And in the rest, this is declaration that I'm trusting you to meet the needs in which I have. So not just marriage, not just rest, but third, in worship. Let's just see this and just this kind of heart and posture within worship. So notice what he says. There's really 4 aspects of worship in verses 32 through 39. So let's go. Verse 32. The first thing in verses 32 through 34 is that they're committing to provide the resources to do the ministry. Verse 32. We will impose the following commands on ourselves: to give 1/8 of an ounce of silver yearly for the service of the house of our God. Keep going. The bread displayed before the Lord, the daily grain offering, the regular burnt offering, the Sabbath and new moon offerings, the appointed festivals, the holy things, the sin offerings to atone for Israel, and for all the work of the house of our God. There's this commitment. We have cast lots among the priests, the Levites, the people, for the donation of wood by our ancestral families at the appointed times each year. Very next verse. They are to bring the wood to our God's house to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. Like, this is overwhelming commitment to say we're committing ourselves to providing the resources to do the ministry in which God has called us to do. So whether it's bread, whether it's regular grain offerings or burnt offerings, whether it's special offerings, Sabbath, new moon, or festivals, whether it's offerings for the holiness or the sin or the duties of the house of God, there's just commitment to say this. In light of all of the things that we've talked about in verses chapter 8 and chapter 9, we are committing ourselves to providing the resources for the ministries of the temple, for them to do the things that they are intended to do. Second, they talk about bringing the first fruits. Verse 35. We will bring the first fruits of our land and every fruit tree to the Lord's house year by year. We will also bring the firstborn of our sons and our livestock as prescribed by the law. We will bring the firstborn of our herds, flocks to the house of our God, to the priests who serve in our God's house. We will bring a loaf from our first batch of dough to the priests of the storerooms of the house of our God. We will also bring the first fruits from our grain offerings of every first tree and the new wine and the fresh oil. This is just saying, we're going to give the first fruits. So stay with their logic here. We're going to commit to providing the necessary things in order to do the ministries of the temple, and then we're going to give the first fruits of our crops, of our cattle, of our herds, of our grain, our offerings, our fruit. Here's our first fruits. This is the best of what God has provided. The first goes to you. Exodus chapter 23, Exodus chapter 34, Deuteronomy chapter 26, Deuteronomy chapter 18, Exodus chapter 13, verses 11 through 16. We won't read it for time, but it's just this commitment that here's the first fruits. And so here's the resources needed to do the ministry. Here are the first fruits. Here are the things that you have blessed. The third thing is just the tithe. Verses 37b through 39a. Go back to verse 37. Notice what he says. A tenth of our land's produce belongs to the Levites, for the Levites are to collect the 1/10 offering in all our agricultural towns. A priest from Aaron's descendants is to accompany the Levites when they collect the 10th, and the Levites are to take a 10th of this offering to the storerooms of the treasury in the house of our God. First part of verse. For the Israelites and the Levites are to bring the contributions of grain, new wine, and fresh oil to the storehouse where the articles of the sanctuary are kept and where the priests who minister are. And so here's this tithe that they give. Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. This giving, this newness. So here they are. This commitment. A renewed commitment to the Lord. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. Here's what Paul says. The point is this. The person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the person who sows generously will also reap generously. Each person should do as he's decided in his heart, not reluctantly or out of compulsion. God loves a cheerful, or we know the word, hilarious giver. Okay, so step back and look in just these three sections. This renewed commitment. We're going to provide the resources that we need in order to do the ministry. We're going to provide the best and the first fruits of our land and flocks and cattle and herds. And then we're going to give a tithe of all the gifts and things that are brought together, of what God has blessed. And then you get to the end of the chapter. And the very last sentence, we will not neglect the house of our God. And so this is a commitment. God, we're going to honor you in our marriage. We're going to honor you in our rest. And again, we're going to renew our commitment in our service and commitment to the Lord. I was asked this week by our finance team to explain a few things. And so let me take just a moment. On Sunday, November 24th, 2 weeks from today, we will take up our annual Barnabas offering. And so if you're new here and you're like, I don't know what the Barnabas offering is, here's what the Barnabas offering is. We will collect, and to date, we've already collected almost $5,000. And so the Barnabas offering is collected, and then we're going to take that money, and we're going to take 10% of it. Now, I have my very best friend in all the world, Blue Brian, who you guys know. Blue texted me before church, and he said, you know how to increase your giving? I was like, what? All right, he said, tell everybody that 10% goes directly to the Chad Morris buyout contract. And I was like, "10% we will give to the Arkansas Baptist Children's Home. We have a close ministry and partnership with them. And so if we get 10,000, then 1,000. If we get 20,000, 2,000, we'll go directly to the Baptist Children's Home. The remaining 90% will go directly to helping in the upgrades of our facility. Some people have asked, well, what are we going to do? Well, first, the building grounds team will meet and figure out exactly. Some of the things that we've discussed or things that we would like to see happen is the carpets in our sanctuary desperately need clean. We need new paint and lights. Finally finish the gym. We need to do some security upgrades, some infrastructure upgrades, update our welcome center and some technology around our church. So why are we doing this? Do you know next year is our 150-year anniversary? So we're going to have exciting things here, and as people show up in various places, we want to have our facilities reflect a way that God has richly blessed us in a way that honors the Lord. And so, are you offering? If you want to give. If not, that's fine. But just know that 10% go to the Arkansas Baptist Children's Home, and 90% will go to the building team. So, Dave, what's chapter 10 have to do with me tomorrow? May I say three things, and then I'll be done. First, maybe you're here this morning, and you need to make a renewed commitment for your marriage to be a marriage that honors and glorifies God. Men, maybe this morning, in light of just kind of what God's doing in your life and reading in chapter 8 and chapter 9, as God's speaking to your heart, maybe just this morning you just need to just kind of kneel before the Lord. Come here and pray. Grab your wife by the hand. And you just say to your wife, I've not been the spiritual leader that I need to be. I've not been the spiritual leader within our fellowship, with our family, with our children. And I just want to make this renewed commitment in this moment. God, I want to make sure that my marriage honors and glorifies you. Or maybe for you, it's just you just need to take a step of faith and trust the Lord. Just say, God, I'm going to trust you. I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know how this is going to take. I have no idea, but I'm going to take a step of faith and I'm going to trust you. And third, maybe it's just a renewed commitment to participate in supporting the ministries of the church. Did you notice something in verses 35 through 39? Underline this. Verse 35. We will bring the first fruits. Verse 36, we will bring the firstborn. Verse 37, we will bring a loaf. Verse 37, we will also bring. Verse 39, and the Levites are to bring contributions of grain. There's this commitment in this fellowship, in this nation here, to say, we're going to participate. I'm going to bring. What can I do? Where can I serve? How can I minister? And to help. Or maybe you're here this morning and you need to go back to the very first part. And your prayer to the Lord today is, God, here's my life. Here's my heart. Here's my mind. Here's my mouth. Here's my marriage. Here is my life in this commitment to the Lord.